But then the other thing I realized is Bitcoin is thermodynamically sound money, and it's a thermodynamically sound network. The idea of thermodynamically sound is very important to an aeronautical engineer, because in order to create airplanes, you normally do all the modeling and engineering based upon assumptions of adiabatic systems. And an adiabatic system is a sealed closed system, and in a sealed closed system where energy doesn't leave or enter the system, you can solve all the problems. And so they say assume an adiabatic system, and it turns out that if the system is not adiabatic, if it's not sound and sealed, you can't solve any problem. And so the real genius of Satoshi was to create a thermodynamically sound monetary system. And if I give you the example, I give you a bathtub, there's a leak in it, or I give you a ship, there's a leak in it, or if I give you a plane and there's a hole in the fuselage, you know that, like, that's always the theme of the horror movies, the Titanic, or the window got blown out in the airplane, explosive decompression. All of the catastrophes are because you don't have an adiabatic system or thermodynamically sound system. The economic catastrophe, that's the analogy here, is hyperinflation, or the collapse of a currency. And so all of my engineering background at MIT was how to design systems that are sound, that work, a ship that flies, and a ship that doesn't, a plane that flies, a ship that doesn't sink, right? You see them in my house when you see the ships that don't sink, the planes that fly, right? Satoshi was a truly genius engineer, but you could also say Satoshi was simply a competent engineer. Satoshi designed a monetary system using semiconductors, public-private key cryptography, and the internet that was possible for the first time sometime around 2009. It was impossible during the time period of Hayek or von Mises, when all the Austrian economists wrote about this. They didn't have the technology to design a thermodynamically sound monetary system. So they used gold, which was an imperfect network and an imperfect asset. It's kind of like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, or maybe Newton, and Leibniz. They're genius scientists, and they want to design an airship. But if you don't have an internal combustion engine and petroleum, you can't make an airplane. The Wright brothers had petroleum and a motor, an internal combustion engine, and they could create an airplane. Maybe not so theoretically genius, but practically they made us fly. So Satoshi took all of the math, all of the engineering, all of the monetary theory that came in the hundreds of years or thousands of years before him or her, and created perfect money. And so I think my background, drove me to go to MIT. My education was as an engineer and as a systems engineer. By the way, there's another important point. Aeronautical engineers are probably the greatest of all systems engineers, because to create an airplane, you have to master civil engineering, mechanical engineering, metallurgy. You have to master electrical engineering, stability. And if you get anything wrong, the plane crashes and burns. And you can't, for example, you have to build an airplane with aluminum, even though the best material is steel, because steel is so heavy, the plane crashes. You can never fly a steel plane. And so you have to make a compromise. And the compromise is, I have a plane that flies, but it's not as strong as steel. When you're a civil engineer, you use steel, but the building doesn't fly. So if you apply that to money and Bitcoin was an engineered system with compromises. Like, well, why can't you just clear the transactions every 5 seconds? Well, because it's not stable, right? If you want it to be stable, then you have to clear the transactions every 10 minutes.